It's election 2023, and I'm very pleased to be joined in studio by leader of the National Party, Christopher Luxon. Hello.
Hello, good to be with you.
Thank you for making the time. I understand a Rhema fan from way back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, it was actually what our family listened to all through the 80s, I guess, is really what was on all our car radio stations into the 90s. And it's what we grew up with.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm so glad you came in to have a bit of a chat with us today. And I'm really keen to explore, your plan and your vision for New Zealand. And obviously, we've got some things that, we need to talk about there. The thing I actually wanted to start with, though, is that, it's been, quite the career transition for you. Just before we came on air, we were talking about your world before politics. I'm very interested to know, first and foremost, you're now a leader of the National Party. It's election season. Is it everything you hoped and dreamed it would be?
Oh, I've absolutely loved it. The last 2 years has been fantastic. And I was fortunate that I'd had a good sort of up-close personal observation of both the key English government, but also Jacinda Ardern's government as well. So I sort of knew what I was getting into. And frankly, it sort of, has met my expectations. I don't feel like there's anything that surprised me too much.
Interesting.
But it's been a very, rapid rise and a rapid entry into politics. And, we've worked hard to turn the National Party around and then to hold the government to account and then hopefully give people a sense of what we want to do to get out of the mess that we're in at the moment.
Did you feel in terms of even the way of communicating politically as well? I mean, look, this is not something unique to you, but I'm sure prior to all this, there's a filter that you need to start to apply that, the way you'd love to be able to talk maybe is not quite the same way because, people are going to look to take their spin on things.
Yeah, the political press side of it is different from the commercial press, from my old world. But again, a lot of it is just trying to think through how you actually engage and get people to actually hear where you're coming from and get a sense of what you're about and what's driving you.
Yeah.
But look, a lot of it's very, very similar in terms of a lot of the leadership challenge is actually very much the same. How do you get a team that was dysfunctional actually playing together well, properly formed as a team, get the right people in the right places, build the right culture with the staff and with the MPs, and then focus on what we should be focusing on, which is playing our role in democracy and being the opposition. But also I've been a big believer of let's oppose, but also let's propose ideas as well. And that's been fun working out, what practically in a common sense way would actually take the country forward. So it's been a great transition and one that I've thoroughly loved and enjoyed. And it's just a huge privilege and a great responsibility to do the job, but huge privilege to do it.
And so tell me then about what skills do you think really translated across well? I mean, you mentioned in terms of leadership and putting a team together. I mean, it'd probably be fair to say you had quite the challenge stepping into the role to do all that. But what things in particular, maybe there were stuff that you did, say within Air New Zealand or other roles that translated across? Well,
I think, when you see great organisations, whether they're community organisations, whether they're businesses or whether they're, even political organisations, it's actually not about taking business principles into the political world. It's actually about just the principles of good leadership and good organisations, because there's a lot of bad businesses. You just wouldn't want any of that practice in political life either. So for me, a lot of it has been sort of what's the vision? How do you actually get the best out of people, put the right people in the right seats in the right place? How do you make sure that you actually solve problems? I spent a lot of my life doing that, turning things around, working with, through and for people. And in essence, that's been what this job's about as well. And that's what the challenge is for the country, I think, ultimately, is that, yes, I'm not a 20-year career politician. I actually think that's a good thing because you come to the job with real-world experience and a different perspective, an outside perspective. And the country's in a place where it actually needs someone who understands the economy well, and not just the dollars and the cents and the economics and all that dry stuff, but actually understands that the economy is actually what is, when it works well and it's well managed, you avoid the economic pain and suffering that people are experiencing right now, I believe, because there's been such a huge amount of economic mismanagement going on in the country. Because that economy then enables people to get ahead, but it also enables us to invest in the public services like better health and education that we desperately want to get as well.
Yeah, because those things are sometimes set as almost like an opposition to one another, right? That, you can be for the economy or you can be for public services and...
Oh, they're completely linked. That's the thing, right? I mean, you just cannot have a world-class education system or all the aspiration we want to have in healthcare if you don't have the economic foundation to be able to deliver it. And so the reason we want to have a strong economy is to lift wages and incomes for all New Zealanders so they get more freedom and choice as to how they get to live their life. But it's also the way we get to afford better public services and the infrastructure we need to build and all those other things as well. So it's not the money or the economy for the economy's sake. It's actually what it enables us to do is actually what it's really about.
And what do you think has been missing from the approach that, say, the government's taken over the last, say, 6 years?
Yeah, look, I think there's three things. One is there's been a huge amount of economic mismanagement. It's a government that's spent more. Government spending's up $1 billion a week, up over 80%, and yet we haven't seen an 80% improvement in education or health or crime or anything. It's taxed more. It's taking $100 million a day extra in tax from New Zealanders. And sadly, it's borrowed more. It's gone from $5 billion of debt to $73 billion of debt that our kids will end up paying off. And that limits the choices that they get to have in the future in New Zealand as well. So that whole, the economic policies have then created inflation. That's led to high interest rates. That's now led to New Zealand being the only country in the Asia-Pacific region in a recession. And that comes with it a risk of rising unemployment. And that's just the history of economics. But their policies have made that happen. And as a result, that's causing huge pain and suffering for Kiwis. 1 in 2 of us are now worried about money on a daily basis. There's 430,000 Kiwis behind on their debt. There's families that I've met that are in food banks that have good jobs and average incomes that are there in record numbers. And so that's the consequence of economic mismanagement. I think the second big challenge is there's been a big centralisation and control drive. And we as a party believe in what we call localism and devolution. Those closest to the problem in the community should solve the problem, versus believing that the right answer is to build bureaucracy in Wellington. And so whether that's been the polytechnics, whether it's been the DHBs, whether it's been the 3 water assets, building them into big mega bureaucracies. And that's just led to 15,000 more public servants in Wellington working often in the ministries rather than the front line as police officers or nurses or teachers or teacher aides. So, that's been a challenge. And the third thing I think is there has been a huge amount of identity politics where groups of New Zealanders are pitched against other groups. And whether that's been farmers versus city folk or landlords versus tenants or employers versus employees, there's been a huge amount of that. And I think we've got to say, look, we're really proud of all the diversity that exists in New Zealand, all the individual communities and experiences that we come from and identities that we have. But the thing that unites us is that we're all Kiwis. And so we've got to work harder at uniting the place rather than having division.
Okay, well, let's unpack some of those then, because in terms of your overall 3-part plan, I know there's more to the plan than that, but the 3 big things you've talked about, primarily, number 1 is rebuilding the economy, so we'll talk about some more about that in a moment. Yep. Also, the restoring of law and order and improving schools and healthcare. And I suppose, as you've mentioned, things like schools and healthcare are somewhat connected to the economic solutions and those sorts of things then. Why don't we talk about the identity politics thing? Because I feel like that is something that has gained a lot more ground in the last little while, and it seems to be even one of those topics that's very hard to address without being pigeonholed one way or the other. You're for these people, you're against these people. If you say this, then you hate these guys, or whatever it might be. What is the approach to this then? It'd be fair to say, if I'm playing, ironically, being at Rhema devil's advocate, that there are certain groups of people who are disadvantaged, and is it really unfair to say, well, look, these people, we need to acknowledge what they've been through, that their challenges are different?
Yeah, look, I think the challenge in New Zealand is that we get a choice as to how we want the political discourse to be in this country. And I got to live in America for 8 years, and I watched it over that period of time as people went to the corners, and either you're a Republican or a Democrat and you believe this about that. And as a result, they looked at each other through stereotypes and through labels, frankly. And as a result, it's very, very difficult to actually zip that back up together again when you've got that level of polarisation. And my mum was great, and she always used to say to me as a little boy, walk across the room and go talk to someone different from you, and understand what it's like in their shoes. And I think that's what we need. We can have robust, and we should have and must have robust political debate, but actually the personalisation of that is something that we can avoid in New Zealand if we choose to avoid it. And it's about us consciously choosing between the stimulus and response. We've got a moment to choose how we are going to respond to that. And that creates discipline, but it also is important because civility in our politics kind of matters. In the US, the congressmen and the senators all come in from different cities. They stay very segregated from each other. In New Zealand, we run into each other. We may disagree strongly on the political principles in the debate, but actually it doesn't have to be personalised. And I think we need to work hard at that. We need to model that civility in our politics out. And we need to model it actually at our homes and our families and other places as well. And it's important that, have a robust debate by all means, but just don't need to make it personal.
Yeah, do you feel like we maybe have imported some of that understanding from a media landscape into New Zealand as well? And this is purely my anecdotal take on this one, but that sometimes
I think possibly, but I just say that I do honestly think we have a choice as to how we respond to stuff. And in New Zealand, I think let's not go sleepwalking into the pathway that other Western democracies have gone down, which is increasing levels of polarisation and inability to actually have a proper political debate and discussion, because people are so entrenched and vapour locked into their positions that they're not prepared to step out of their world to go find out, well, why is someone thinking so differently from me, and actually engage and be curious about that. It's very easy, right? Everyone gets into their echo chambers. They listen to people who are the same world from them, that are in the same circles. They listen to the same media, consume the same media, have the same sort of views, and actually don't look to be challenged or provoked with something different. And I think that's important.
So then, last question from me then on the economic side of things too, is that, there is, some point that I think might be legitimate in that, when you're trying to say, I want to, rebuild the economy or fix the economy, there are a lot of things that are massively outside of your control, out of any government's control. And we look at what has happened around the country as well, around the world rather, even things like fuel costs or whatever too. Those aren't things that, when you say, I want to rebuild the economy and fix that sort of thing, cost of living, you can't really wave a wand and be like, cool, now petrol's back to $2 a litre and, eggs are $6 for a dozen. So, which battles do you pick there? Like when you say specifically reducing cost of living, what can you take direct responsibility for that would help New Zealanders?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no doubt about it. There are international factors, but the Treasury says that we're one of the few countries in the world that's less impacted by those. If you're living in the UK at the moment, you're deeply impacted by Ukraine and heating costs and oil costs and all those things. Our problem in New Zealand is that our inflation has been domestically created. It's not been internationally imported. So yes, there's rising fuel prices. Yes, there was COVID. Yes, there's a war in Ukraine. Yes, there's some element of that impacts our position. But actually, the vast majority of it, frankly, is what's called domestic inflation. And that has happened because this government was the second biggest spender of government spending per capita in the world. I think we were the fourth biggest printers of cash per capita in the world. And we shut the country down like no other. And as a result, all of that pressure spiked asset prices. It led to inflation. When you get inflation, you've only got one thing to do, which is raise interest rates to try and suppress it. When interest rates go up, the risk is you stall the economy and put it into recession, which has now happened. And then when economy's in recession and businesses are laying off workers, that leads to rising unemployment. When people lose a job and can't buy food or pay their rent, that's a different level of pain again. So what you've got to do is you can do all this Band-Aid economics over the top, or otherwise you get to the causes of it. And for us it is, stop passing costs on to businesses that lead to higher prices, free up the immigration settings and also the red tape so that people can actually grow companies and businesses and keep people employed. Go through the $137 billion of government spending. It's not the government's money, it's taxpayers' money. Make sure they're getting value for it. Give people tax relief because they'll spend it and save it better than the government and Chris Hipkins will. And then ultimately get the Reserve Bank getting inflation back under 3%. And that's the lessons of history over the last 50 years that we have to relearn again.
Well, one of the lessons of history too with government spending is it is notoriously hard to ever go down from one year to the next, right? Like if you ever look through, I think it is the, even say last 100 years or so, to find a government that's managed to say, okay, guys, before I spent this, we have now spent less. I don't think it's ever been done.
Yeah, Bill English did a very good job where actually I think that the thing I'd say is that what amazes me coming from the outside world is it's only in politics that governments measure their success by how much money they're spending rather than the results that they're achieving. So how do you spend $5 billion more on education, hire 1,400 more bureaucrats, and yet our attendance records are worse for kids going to school? 40% of our kids don't go to school regularly. Now we have half our 15-year-olds failing the most basic maths, reading and writing tests, so our academic achievement's bad. So how do you spend more, hire more and get worse outcomes? And that's a particular skill set of this government. But I do believe that it's actually got to be about outcomes. We're going to spend more money each and every year on health and education. That's really critical for us to make sure we've got good levels of investment going in. But the bigger issue is how do you get performance and how do you get outcomes? Because it's actually when your kids can actually read and write that actually gives them opportunities to take on jobs that actually could be higher paying, that sets them up for a future. That's important. when you actually focus on delivering, lowering wait times for hospitals and access to specialists and surgeries, that's the stuff that makes a difference out there for people's lives. When you actually focus on reducing crime rather than just reducing the prison population, that's the way in which you actually get outcomes that improve people's daily lives.
Well, and that does lead into, talking about the law and order side of things too, number 2 in the big 3 for national this year. And I mean, as you mentioned there, when it comes to economic outcomes, often, there is a correlation between crime and economics and how people are feeling there. So talk to us about that. I mean, the high level is restoring law and order. What does that mean?
Well, there's two things we have to do at the same time. One is we actually have to do what Bill English called social investment, and I'm a big fan of it. I've seen it work in bits of the US, where we basically use data to identify families and individuals that are going to are on a trajectory that just we know isn't good for them. And so actually, how do we make powerful targeted interventions using the data to actually support those families and to actually lift them up? And to raise them up, and that's really what we've got to do. And you can
what do some of those things look like?
Well, you can see interactions. The social determinants really of what causes crime, for example. It's poverty, it's housing insecurity, it's health issues, it's education issues. So where we see those interactions with the criminal justice system, or we've got to be able to get social workers and community organisations in particular, I believe, into doing that work. And getting alongside those individuals and families. And if you can, we know if we can keep a kid in school, they get a chance to actually get a job, that is a much better life than letting them go on to welfare before the age of 25. If they're on welfare before then, they're on average for the next 15 years. Over that 15 years, you're paying $20,000 probably just in benefits, let alone actually all the admin associated with that. So why wouldn't we take some of that value, that money we're going to spend in the future, because we know where that's going to go, and take some of that money and surge it and pull it forward so we can actually change the trajectory of where those lives are going.
So are there some programs, though, that we've seen successfully? The benefit trappers are well established kind of
There's
thing,
some
right?
Great programs. I see it all the time. And I'm out with them typically most weeks. But what I really want to do, one of my great heroes was a guy called Viktor Frankl, and he was one of the great Holocaust survivors and psychiatrists in the world. But he wrote a good book called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book is, the 3 actors in society being government, business, and community. And I think what's happened is we've gone into a very parent-child relationship where the government dominates everything and doesn't actually partner or work well with the business or the community sector. And yet, if you think about it, government sets up the rules and the frameworks and enables things to happen. Businesses can move with great speed and scale, and community organisations, of which there's some fantastic ones across New Zealand doing amazing work, getting great outcomes, see the pain, the hurt, the need, the frustration. So why aren't we taking the money out of the centre of Wellington and giving it to the community organisations, empowering them up, given they get better results? A good example for me was mental health. We sided with the government to say, look, we will support the $1.9 billion investment in mental health. It was found out later that it didn't really go anywhere. It didn't lead to any improved access and support and services. And yet Mike King with Gumboot Fridays doing amazing work, and there's many other organisations too in that space. And so, why don't we just double up the amount of money we give Mike, which is what I've committed to do, because he's getting good outcomes. And every dollar you give him, he generates something like $8.30 in social benefit of costs that we're not incurring across the criminal justice, health, education system anyway. So I think we have to think really differently about scaling and powering up community organisations that are doing great work and getting great results.
Yeah, there's that sort of, maybe ambulance at the top of the cliff, maybe the police car at the top or the bottom of the cliff is the right way to talk about this one. When you're looking at different criminal activities that are happening in New Zealand, there's that sense of, how do we prevent things, which it sounds like,
so there's two bits. There's sort of like tough on the causes of crime, for want of a better way of saying a bit of a cliche, and then tough on crime. And I think, that's the other part, is that the reality is we're not calling people to rights and responsibilities, and we need to be able to do that. You've got certain rights as a Kiwi, but you've also got certain responsibilities to each other and to the country. And at the moment, sadly, the government has sent from the top a very soft on crime sort of message, and it's sort of said to, that you can kind of get away with it. And that's because it's had one goal only, a 30% reduction in the prison population. We would all want to see that, but actually that would come when you have a 30% reduction in crime. And go meet with retailers who are doing it incredibly tough. And I think of a number of heartbreaking stories there of people who have worked incredibly hard to be ram-raided and have their business and their livelihoods destroyed, and the trauma and the anxiety that comes with all of that. We've got major increases in violent crime. We now have had a 70% growth in gang membership. There's now 9 gang members for every 10 police officers. We have a RAM rate in this country every 11 hours. So we get to choose, because otherwise what happens is every 6 months it gets more frequent, it gets more gratuitous, and it gets more violent. And so we have to say, look, enough is enough. We actually do need to be able to work on the causes and determinants of what's driving the crime, but you can't just do that alone. It's an and, not an or. And you also have to call people to responsibility, and therefore that's why we say we're going to back the police, tackle the gangs, serious consequences for serious young offenders, and stronger sentencing.
So let's then talk about schools and healthcare then. I mean, we've kind of, as I'm sure people have noticed, these things interweave just a little bit.
Yeah, they do. They're all linked.
What do you feel like's missing then from our approach to schooling right now, and what's creating these outcomes where, as you say, what is it, up to 40% of
not in school.
Not in school regularly? So what does that actually mean when you're saying that, when they're not in school regularly? What's the metric for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I come at the education thing, it's quite personal for me, because, I grew up with a great mum and dad, but they'd left school at 15 and 16.
Sure.
And I was the first of the 3 boys to ever go to university in my family. And I've just felt that education got me from a set of circumstances to an even better set of circumstances, really. And that's actually what we want it to be about. We're a party that doesn't believe in an equality of outcome, that we should all be treated the same. That's called socialism. We just don't buy that. But we do buy deeply that we believe in an equality of opportunity. That if you're a 5-year-old setting off in New Zealand, irrespective of your family, your neighbourhood, your community, that you deserve a shot at your version of the Kiwi dream, whatever that may need to be. And how do we get you to the start line so that you can actually, have that opportunity? And I think that's where education comes in. You really want to make sure education is one of those things, as I said, that gets you from a set of circumstances to a better set. So for me, where are we at today? Well, we have 40% of our kids not at school regularly, which means they're not at school 9 days out of 10 or more. We've got 75,000 kids, sadly, chronically absent from school, which I think is over 7 days or less at school.
And 7 days at less, what, per?
Out of 7 days out of 10.
Oh, right, okay,
Yep. And so, essentially when you think about that, everyone goes, that doesn't sound like a lot. Well, actually, it all adds up. And so you end up losing a year of schooling over 13 years if that's your regular attendance rate.
Right.
And that's a big problem. So we've got major challenges on attendance, but part of that is really linked to academic achievement. And so half our kids now arrive at third form or year 9 at high school, not actually at the standard they need to be at to take on high school. And so if you're 13 and you read like a 9-year-old, it's no wonder you don't bother going to school anymore or get disengaged from school pretty quickly. And then we did there's a regular test that's on at 15, and this year half our 15-year-olds failed the most basic, and I mean basic maths, reading and writing test. And most alarmingly, in our really challenged schools, our decile 1 schools, 98% of our kids failed the writing test, 90% failed the reading test. So how on earth are we supposed to get, it's a social challenge and a social problem. It's also a big economic problem, because how on earth do we access higher paying jobs if we're not educating the next generation better than the one that went before it? So you have those challenges. And when I came through, we were in the top 10 countries in the world on maths, reading and science, and we're well out of the top 10 countries now. So surely our goal has to be, let's get 80% of our kids sorted by 2030 so they're ready to go for high school. Let's make sure that we're actually back in the top 10 by 2033. How do we do it? We have to go back and teach an hour of maths, an hour of reading and writing each and every day in primary and intermediate. Yes, we have to have a really well-defined curriculum, because our curriculums are too loose and too high and over 3 years, not individual years. And be clear about it's teacher instructed about we're teaching these concepts at this time, this year, to these kids. We've got to have regular monitoring and assessment every 6 months to make sure our kids aren't getting left behind, and we can identify dyslexia earlier and make the interventions we need. And we need to support the teachers who are doing a great job, but actually the system's letting them down. And that means giving them some tools and technologies that can help them be more efficient with their time so they can actually teach.
Do you feel like you've got the buy-in as well from the teacher organisations as well? Because there seems to sometimes be a little pushback when, to be honest, it may not be limited just to your party, but in general, when a new education policy is submitted, then different teachers' unions or organisations will come back and say, it's a terrible idea because blah blah blah. Yeah. But ultimately, you'll need these people on board to make this plan happen, right? Yeah. So how do you change that?
Well, I think this isn't just us making it up on the fly. This has been a lot of work from Erica Stanford and myself, just actually talking to experts, meeting with teachers, meeting with principals, meeting with educators, seeing what's worked in other jurisdictions around the world where they had falling standards and they managed to turn it around, and how did they do it. And so we know that there is some really common evidence-based stuff in education that we really need to make sure that we are really following versus just what's the current sort of philosophy at the moment that sort of is a bit of a vibe rather than actually something that's really very specific and evidence-based. So, yeah, look, I mean, I think we've put together a really good program. There's always more to do, but at the moment, what's the key thing? Teach our kids the basics so that they get a shot on to be able to do the more extended learning later.
Okay. So, look, a couple of quicker ones in the time that we've got left, and this might be hard to answer quickly, but we've had a few of our listeners ask particularly, do you think we have a problem with free speech in New Zealand?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think I'll always defend people's ability, for free speech, and I may not like what you say, but I have to defend your ability to say it, and I think that's important.
Would you change anything about the current abortion laws?
No, I've made a commitment that actually we opened that conversation up before I came to Parliament. I personally am pro-life, but that's, we've opened those up, we've litigated that conversation, and they won't be changing in my government.
How would you stop talent from leaving New Zealand?
It's really about making sure we get an economy where people feel that they can work and actually get ahead, make sure that they actually can feel safe in their homes, their businesses and communities by getting on top of that law and order, and also making sure they have got a future where they actually believe they can access healthcare when it's needed, and also their kids are going to be set up for a future. And so it is the combination of all of those things that makes the proposition such that people feel if I work hard in the best country on earth, I can get ahead and do well. I can start a business. I can raise my family. I can make a contribution to the community. And so, and at the moment, 34,000 Kiwis left in the last year because they don't feel that. And that's my job as Prime Minister, is to build that proposition back strongly. Okay.
You can take a little bit more time with this one if you like. But as we are obviously a Christian radio station, it's very important to our listeners. I'd just love to know, just based on your understanding, why should a Christian vote for the National Party?
Well, actually, this is really interesting. I spoke about this in my maiden speech, and I encourage anyone to read it. But because my Christian faith is really important to me. It's given me huge grounding and centrality and a set of values about how I teach, how I interact with people. It's how my parents raised us and our faith experience as well. And my faith heroes are people like the William Wilberforces and Kate Shepherds and Martin Luther Kings, who actually chose to get involved in the world and actually work it out and actually treat people in the right way. But I also have a belief that you shouldn't vote for me just because I'm a Christian. And actually, as a Christian, I shouldn't be proselytizing my views, that I'm here to represent all New Zealanders as well. And I think, it's a very dangerous position if you start advocating for one interest group over another group, or one faith over another faith. So yes, my faith is a Christian faith. Yes, it's personal to me. But it means that I am actually here to represent all New Zealanders. And if you think you want to vote for me because I'm a Christian, I just say to you, and if you think that I'm not putting my Christian views out to the rest of New Zealand and expecting them to do that either. I think that's the deal when you come into public life. I'm here to represent everybody and do my best to do that. So from my point of view, it's very simple. I think if you've got a very stark choice, a coalition of chaos with more of the same this year, from the other side, or you get a strong, stable, national-led government that's going to be getting our ambition and some aspiration back into the joint, some more mojo and positivity and confidence, which is what I think the country's missing at the moment. I think we're playing a very negative inward game at the moment. We have so much opportunity in the best country on earth. We have endless potential, amazing people, great part of the world to be part of, good liberal democracy and institutions, no excuses for why we can't do well. But at the moment, we're not realising that opportunity. We're not really solving the problems. We're not maximising opportunities that we have in front of us. So that's the work that I want to get involved with.
Okay. So you get first person's privilege on this this last question that I have for you today too, because of course we have other leaders coming through over the course of this week. And so this last thing is something I like to call pass it on, because our next political leader coming in is going to be Winston Peters.
Oh, right.
And so your opportunity is to pass on a question to him. So what would be your question to Winston Peters?
Well, I'd just say to him, I just want to know what his plans are for the country, really, and how he's going to take it forward and keep the country united, because I think that, people want us to make life a little less expensive, a lot more convenient, and a lot more united. And I'd be interested in asking him the question, how's he planning to make New Zealand more united?
I will absolutely put that to him then. Chris Luxon, thank you so much again for coming in. Leader of the National Party, possibly future Prime Minister of New Zealand. We'll have to wait and see.
Appreciate it. Good to be with you. Thanks for your time.